This is Bold Dominion, a state politics explainer for Changing Virginia. I'm Nathan Moore. In my job at the radio station, I get a lot of press releases and marketing emails. There's this one company that sends me city and state rankings in really some of the oddest categories. Best and worst cities for brunch lovers. Best and worst for naked gardening. Best places for getting stoned. I mean, you put those three together, that's a hell of a weekend. But there are some other lists that are a little more serious. 3 years ago, back in 2019, Virginia ranked at the high and low extremes of two very different lists. CNBC named Virginia the best state for business. Meanwhile, the anti-poverty nonprofit Oxfam ranked Virginia as the worst state for workers. Talk about an inverse relationship. Since then, Virginia elected Democratic majorities to the General Assembly in 2020. Their new policies have catapulted Virginia to the middle of the pack for workers. And despite that, Virginia has remained number one last year in CNBC's rankings for business. Well, both CNBC and Oxfam are going to release their 2022 rankings next month. Here at Bold Dominion, we started wondering, what does this ranking of best state for business actually mean for working people? Like, really mean? And could the Commonwealth ever be very good for both business and workers? This week, I'm talking with Richmond-based journalist Peter Galaska. He's been covering business and economic news for more than 4 decades, mostly here in Virginia.
Virginia's come out on top the last couple of years. They've been doing them. It's actually the workforce. I mean, 39% of Virginians have bachelor's degrees, and they're the third highest state for science, technology, and STEM stuff. And their cost of doing business is good. The very fact that you have an educated workforce is one reason why, for example, Amazon located its second headquarters in Northern Virginia. And recently, you've had Raytheon, a big Massachusetts defense company, doing likewise. I mean, relocating in Northern Virginia. According to Steve Murray, the former head of the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, it wasn't so much the usual incentives like goodies and money and tax breaks. It was the fact that Amazon was interested because Virginia was going to put in with Virginia Tech a special school in that area to prepare like a whole generation of tech-savvy workers.
With a study like this, how much does it actually mean? I mean, obviously it's a feather in the cap. We get some nice national press for a while, but is there actual juice behind it, or is there actual? Was it kind of a fluffy thing CNBC does?
Well, I think it is. I think it's interesting. I mean, the CNBC pronouncement went against in last year's gubernatorial race, for example. The Youngkin people, Republicans, poo-pooed it and say, "Oh no, Virginia's losing business. It's not as good as like North Carolina, South Carolina, or Georgia." And that was kind of a bone of contention. In fact, North Carolina actually came in second behind Virginia in the recent CNBC study. And so it's a big argument in that part of the world where, Youngkin wanted to make it sort of cast Virginia as behind when it kind of isn't.
I want to go through some of CNBC's biggest criteria in their methodology, and I want to start with the most heavily weighted one, which is the cost of doing business. What that really is in CNBC's methodology is a measure of tax incentives and tax burdens for businesses.
Right.
And Virginia has very low business taxes. What is
Right.
that? What's that actually look like in the state?
Well, it means that you're not going to come in to do, I mean, you hear people, for example, complain if they move to California is going to really squish them on all kinds of taxes and bills and funds, et cetera, et cetera. And the same is true in states in the Northeast, like, New York and Massachusetts. Whereas you go to a place like Texas, it's like anything goes. And Virginia's sort of that way in a way because it's very pro-business and always has been. And so, in many ways too, Virginia, does not have, housing, except for Northern Virginia, is still relatively cheap. And believe it or not, executives have told me that Dominion's power is sort of in the middle, which is an advantage for them to want to move here. Whereas, you go to other states, especially on either coast, you're going to be paying a lot more for power.
So with the low business taxes, I want to take a look at what that actually means for working people. I mean, where does state operating revenue come from instead?
Well, it comes from, income taxes, which it comes from, machine and tool taxes, depending on what kind of industry it is, and a number of other taxes that come into play.
Of course, our car taxes, which not every state has.
Yeah, no, it's kind of, but to be frank, I worked in Ohio for a company for 4 years, and I was taxed at the wazoo. I mean, I was taxed. I had to pay federal income tax, Ohio state income tax, and my home was in a locality. I had to pay income tax there. Plus, my office was in yet another locality, and I had to pay income taxes there. So I was being hit for 4 income taxes a year. And of course, if you go to large states and more urban states such as New Jersey and New York, for example, I mean, you buy a home there, you're going to be paying 5 figures at least in property taxes. If I were living in New Jersey, I'd be paying $25,000 to $30,000 a year in property taxes, whereas in Chesterfield County, I pay what, $3,000?
I want to talk more about business taxes, though. Yeah, you've described some places where there's a very high tax burden for individuals and a higher tax burden for businesses.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
mean, are these states just running higher budgets and doing more public services? What's not happening in
Yeah.
Virginia because of the low business
Well,
tax?
I think so. What's not happening in Virginia is obviously the services are not as good. I mean, the roads are not really all that great. And as far as things such as supporting health, supporting education, there needs to be more done in Virginia. And I mean, you can't, Peter and Paul thing, squeeze Peter to pay Paul. That's exactly what seems to be the case here. And there's still kind of a leftover Virginia kind of ideal that is I don't particularly like it. I wish it would go away, but it's still here. And that's like, we're the bosses and we tell you what to do. And we want to make sure that these other, it's the same old Southern stuff going back 100 years where we want to steal your textile industries by, making things really good for you and not so good for our workers.
Well, I want to talk more about the workers, but first I want to get to the next criterion in the CNBC study, which is infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
What does infrastructure include?
Infrastructure would mean roads, water, sewer, and of course broadband. And that's a major, major important thing right now. One advantage in infrastructure, believe it or not, is international fiber underwater cable. And it just means that there are a number of projects coming from South America, from South Africa, and also from Europe, where you're putting in really high-speed broadband underwater cable for thousands and thousands of miles underwater. And a number of them are popping up in the United States in Virginia Beach. And also Northern Virginia also has for years had the biggest traffic load in the internet of any state in the country. So, I mean, that's expanding. And that's one reason why data centers are so popular here, because there's, it's right there, just plug in.
Yeah, Peter, I'm reminded of some other conversations you and I have had over the years about these kind of like two Virginias. You just
Right.
mentioned Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. If you throw in Richmond and some of the college cities, these are very highly developed infrastructure
Mm-hmm.
places,
Right.
both roads and broadband and all the rest, and good water systems and all. And yet, if you go out to Southwest Virginia, Southside Virginia, some other pockets and regions, it's a whole different story, and the
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure is not even the same tier. Take me through kind of that dynamic in the state.
Well, to be sure, there's some improvements. I think Danville is getting more data center type investment, as is Southwest and parts of it. The problem with that South Side and Southwest Virginia is like the old economy. And by old economy, I mean furniture, tobacco, textiles, and coal. And all of them kind of have gone away. I mean, textiles have moved overseas, tobacco's really diminished, furniture has gone to China, and coal is just dying. And back then, you had heavily manufacturing jobs that didn't really require that much education. And you had this kind of like oppressive anti-union atmosphere that really hurt things. I mean, for example, look at Hampton Roads. I mean, Newport News Shipbuilding, which is probably one of the largest shipyards in the world, has been union for a long time. But you wouldn't see that much at an old textile plant in Martinsville.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the difference, of course, is you can't move the port. Just like geographically, there's only a handful of places where that port can exist, and so that gives workers
Mm-hmm.
more power because the company can't just move.
Exactly. And I mean, there's a great book I read in college. I took a course on the South. It was The Mind of the South by Wilbur Cash, which was written, I think, in the late 30s, early 40s. And he really made some wonderful points that, the Southern managers back in the day had this attitude with whites, like lower class, working class whites, like, we'll make you a deal, we'll give you an okay job, and we'll make sure that the blacks are beneath you and you can always look down on them. And that was true. That was kind of the whole mentality. And it was like divide and conquer. I mean, it's like going back to Norma Ray. Remember the movie
Mm-hmm.
back in the 70s?
So it's essentially like fighting any sort of class solidarity that might emerge through essentially racial separation.
Exactly. And it was a wedge, and they drove the wedge as much as they could. And another issue with Virginia was, don't forget that Virginia for many, many years was really an agrarian state. And that mean like the master and the worker, slave, the shareholder, the former slave, the slave. And that only really started to change, except for some manufacturing pockets, until after World War II. And that's when you really saw a lot of real industry coming here and a big growth in defense.
I want to talk about that the CNBC methodology, and this is one that you and I've already hinted at some in this interview, but the category called workforce. Mm-hmm. And so this is sort of an all-encompassing category that looks at both the legal regime and also the kind of characteristics of the available workers. Virginia, in CNBC's mind, scores very high because we have a high percentage of both educated workers and very low union membership with right-to-work laws that make it harder to become to organize unions. Take me through what this actually ends up, how this actually ends up playing out.
Well, I think the thing is that you have a number of really highly rated public universities in Virginia, such as UVA, Tech, William and Mary, and some others. And of course, they've all improved in the last several decades very much. And they're like world class. I mean, they're not just going to turn out, white guys who are going to take over their dad's business. And now people who are actually doing really innovative things with, I know recently, I think just this past week or two, there was news that UVA was regarded by some folks as the top software writing school in the country. So that's what you mean. I mean, you have a really, really strong higher level, college level educational system here. But Virginia really is known for that. And it produces like a steady stream of well-educated and scientifically minded workers. And I mean, the people in the red rural areas are pretty much left out of this unless they go to UVA or someplace like that. So I think that's what it means, because they don't have to be, retrained that much.
It's like the universities in Virginia are both I was talking with Jeff Thomas about this, who wrote about the Virginia Way and kind of how money has just become the Virginia Way nowadays. It's the new Virginia Way, where it was sort of like old Virginia families. But he talked about schools like UVA and William and Mary, how they're kind of like two universities layered on top of one another. One is the training ground for the elite to remain elite, so these are the people who come from wealth and are going to go off and work at Goldman Sachs or something. But it's also a place for kind of the middle and working class Virginians with strong academics to kind of like climb the meritocratic ladder. And so it sort of makes these universities, like they end up functioning as kind of a way for Virginia's elite to pick out young people from middle and lower classes and bring them up into the upper middle and upper classes.
I agree with that. And I mean, I think one thing that brings us an interesting point, and I think it's also a really point of contention right now, because at some of these schools, you have older white alumni who want to bring it back to the old days where they want training to take over their daddy's law firm or bank or whatever. And they really don't want the states to really improve their research in other areas. That's one of the reasons, as far as I can tell, why you had the Therese Sullivan issues. She was a president of UVA and they wanted to get rid of her. And she was temporarily gotten rid of, but they brought her back because she was very popular. And that's the heart of that, was exactly what you just described.
Peter Galaska is a journalist based in the Richmond area. He's covered Virginia's economy for more than 4 decades. We'll hear more from him after a short break. You're listening to Bold Dominion, a state politics explainer for a changing Virginia. Visit us online at bolddominion.org. Hey, and I want to tell you, we're looking for good ideas to cover in future episodes of this show. If you've ever had a question about state politics, something that just didn't make sense and you want somebody to explain it to you, well, let us know. Maybe we can help. Shoot us an email at bolddominion@virginia.edu. You can always find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever fine podcasts are served up. Go ahead and subscribe. Bold Dominion is a member of Virginia Audio Collective, online at virginiaaudio.org. You can check out all the podcasts from the collective, from science to history to music to community affairs. We amplify the voices of people in our community and help them tell stories that matter. Listen and subscribe at virginiaaudio.org. Well, in the second half of today's show, we continue our conversation with journalist Peter Galaska, diving into more of the criteria that make Virginia best for business and exploring what that means for workers. Also on workforce, in this CNBC rankings is right to work laws and union membership. So,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
Virginia does have right to work laws, which, well,
Hmm.
take me through what were right to work laws? What are they?
Hmm.
How'd they come
Okay.
to be? What do they do for unions?
Okay. Well, basically, right to work came about in 1947 with federal law. It was a Taft-Hartley law, a labor law, big one, and it allowed this to happen if states could choose if they don't want to be they want to have a so-called right to work, which means you don't have to join a union and you don't have to pay union dues, whereas in other states you do. There are 27 states that have right to work laws, including Virginia. And the idea is, on the one side, they're saying, well, why should I have to join a union, which is mandatory in some like large Midwestern or Northeastern states? Most of the right to work states are in the South and the middle of the Midwest.
The idea with the union membership typically is if your workplace votes to go union, then that union will represent all the workers and all the workers pay dues. But with
Right.
right to work, you simply don't have to pay dues unless you feel like it joining.
Well, the unions complain that they do a lot of work in getting, better pay, better benefits, better working conditions for everyone, and yet some people don't pay for that. They pay, then that's where they think it's unfair. And of course, the overriding reason for its existence is a power play. As usual, divide and conquer.
Mhm.
By having right to work, you keep unions weak. What's interesting now is a whole issue over public employees and unions. The General Assembly passed a law that kind of keeps state employees out of the unions, but it allows localities to approve, public unions if they want. But even that is sort of a half step because it doesn't give the unions full power.
So with low union membership in Virginia, with it being harder to form unions in Virginia, that has presumably kept wages and working conditions more in the boss's favor.
Yes, it is. But then on the other hand, if you're bringing in a tech firm or even a financial services firm, you've got to keep up with the Joneses. You know what I'm saying? You can't just offer somebody a lot lower salary because it's Virginia. It's just not going to work if you're importing people, that is.
One thing I wanted to, and that actually is kind of an interesting look at a category CNBC calls life, health, and inclusion.
Mhm.
There was a more generic category CNBC had called quality of life, but now they call it life, health, and inclusion.
Mhm.
What's going on with this category?
Well, what it means is sort of a more modern way of saying that you would have the state offers good amenities in terms of things to do on vacation. It means that your traffic may be less. And as far as health, you've got good, accessible, not too expensive health systems. And inclusion means everything. It means from, minorities and people of color having more advantages, and also gay people having, rights. And big companies now really mark highly for that. It means that some states like Florida and Texas are going to lose because they're in some ways anti-gay and anti-minority. And so Virginia has recently, the General Assembly has done a lot as for inclusion, like, gay marriage and things like that, although the current Republicans want to push that back.
Yeah, so it's interesting. CNBC kind of altered the criteria a little bit right around the same time Democrats had majorities in the state House of Delegates and state Senate, and happened to pass laws that match the new criteria.
How about that? No, but I mean, that's sort of, they're seeing that, you got to look towards the future and what everybody wants. And you just can't say, well, this is the Virginia way and that's the way we've always done it. And you don't like it, stay home. I mean, you can't have that attitude anymore.
Well, there is some of that attitude with Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin and the new Republican majority in the House of Delegates. They're kind of de-emphasizing some of the things we just talked about in terms
Exactly.
of LGBT civil rights and other inclusivity measures. We have another CNBC poll coming out in a month. It might be too soon, and there aren't enough substantial changes for that to be an issue maybe yet. But what does that bode for the future?
It depends on what actually is put into policy or law. I mean, if you have clear-cut anti-inclusion legislation, that's going to come up badly. But I'll tell you one thing. I mean, Youngkin's only been in power for 6 months. This coming up survey will only cover last year when he wasn't in power at all.
Mm.
And I'll guarantee you one thing. If Virginia comes out number one again, you're going to hear it trumpeted from the governor's office.
Even though it was during the previous administration.
It was kind of ironic given that Youngkin's people were really putting down CNBC last year as being wrong, and their methodology was all screwed up.
One other one that Virginia ranks very highly in the CNBC ratings, and that's another category that's a little squishy sounding, but it's called business friendliness, which is really looking at at a legal and regulatory framework that doesn't, quote, overburden business. That's looking at like liability climates and regulatory regimes and overall bureaucracy. And evidently we're pretty open to businesses just kind of doing what they want and not having to deal with much.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I mean, that's in a sense, that's kind of a little bit, counterintuitive because, I mean, if you have no regulations or very light regulations, then, it does hurt the state. I mean, look at what's going on, say, in the environmental sector, where you used to have citizen boards like the Air Pollution Control Board and the Water Board making decisions, and they tended to usually go for what the industries wanted as far as proving, how much pollution they could put in the sky and the water. And certainly coal. People got away with mountaintop removal and all kinds of practices. And the same goes for safety. The same goes for having to really pay workers more in terms of benefits, in terms of vacations, in terms of, say, maternity and paternity leave. And that's really kind of bad news. I mean, that's what businesses tend to want, though.
Well, so Peter, overall, I'm getting a picture of Virginia's business climate here over the course of our conversation. We have a strong education system and higher education system, and have
Mhm.
for a long time, and
Mhm.
so we churn out a lot of highly educated workers. In the cities, we have pretty strong infrastructure, but we also have a political culture of really letting businesses kind of do what they want and not have to pay much in tax or deal with much regulation.
Mhm.
And it's also harder for workers to organize and unionize and demand better wages and conditions. But workers with resources and education, particularly in tech fields, can ask for more on some kind of merit or patronage system that the businesses run. There's sort of a cultural shift to kind of good lifestyle things like sustainable energy and inclusivity and access to healthcare. These are all good things,
Mhm.
but the fundamental power dynamic, economic power in particular, is still very much in the business's favor rather than kind of that of working people.
I agree with that. It's just that I think that it's sort of, it's being chipped away at, as years go on and more Virginia's businesses become more attached either nationally or globally. A lot of ideas are coming in. I mean, I don't know. I mean, for example, a lot of the rest of the world, I mean, in Europe, for example, they take 4 to 6 week vacations. And that's just not true here. And that's going to give way. I mean, that's going to give way over time as are, some of the other things are, as the world grows up. It's just that some people in Virginia want to turn the clock back.
The other thing that's looking at the CNBC study and the survey they released here. It's the most institutional kind of like business media there is, except for maybe like Forbes or whatever, but they're in the same ballpark. And so they are deciding, or they're kind of looking out at the business world and saying like these are the values and things that business wants now,
Hmm.
and Virginia seems to kind of line up with it.
Yeah.
We're physically in a good position, like where we are in the country, and that helps, of course.
Hmm.
But we've got educated workers who don't demand too much or organize too much,
Hmm.
and businesses can kind of run the show.
Right. That's the way it seems to be. And I think that in many ways, a lot of the big areas like New York, say, and parts of California may be losing their shtick a little bit because there's just so many problems there. And not that they're not problems here, but I mean, in terms of crime, for example, crime is a problem in the inner cities, but generally speaking, it isn't. And um, and that's the kind of thing too. And don't forget that one of the benefits to Virginia is that it has a beach nearby, it's got the bay nearby, it's got the mountains nearby. There's a lot to do,
Mhm.
and you don't have to drive for hours and hours to do it. And that's an attractive thing. Plus, its location is good. I mean, it's right really close to the northeastern centers of gravity and the Midwest and parts of the South. And so that I think that's why it's a good place to be.
What about all the workers in Virginia that don't have tech backgrounds? I mean, so much of this conversation is about landing new tech companies and all
Hmm.
that, but we've got 8 million people, a lot of whom don't have college degrees, a lot of whom don't have
Hmm.
the kind
Yeah.
of bargaining power based on their own merit and like specialized skills. What for everybody else?
Well, that's a big problem because I mean, you split to the rural areas. They're really getting it on downward turns on several fronts. Number one, they don't really attract that many high-paying industries. A lot of hospitals and clinics in their areas have been shut down. If they need medical care, they often have to drive for an hour or more. And schools may or may not be any good, and they may not have access to broadband, although they're working on that. And that's really what brings it down. When I talk to economic development people, the thing that they're really trying to push are like mega sites or super sites or whatever you want to call them, where you have manufacturing or data center ready large plots of land of at least 1,000 acres that are already, have the water and sewers already in, the broadband's in, the electricity's in, and they said they need natural gas. And that's also an asset. If you're near a gas pipeline, then they claim that you've got a better chance of landing a good industry. But that seems to be what I hear from economic development people, is that the thing the state needs to really work on is developing more of these sites, because there really aren't that many in the state. That's one reason, by the way, that Lego went to Chesterfield County, was because that's in a big park where everything is there.
Well, Peter, what's the future hold for Virginia's economic development and the business climate?
If it stays kind of with its, head above the clouds, it will be fine. It's just that it can't be dragged down by, the people who want to turn the clock back to what they imagined to be a better time when it really wasn't. And in my time in Virginia, I've noticed that state's improved, and I just hope it will continue to do so.
Peter Galaska is a journalist based in the Richmond area. Thanks to him for joining us for this week's show. My name's Nathan Moore, and I'm the host of Bold Dominion. Our editor this week was Ashley Park, and Sadie Randall and Omega Ilovich helped out with production. You can find us online at bolddominion.org, and don't forget to subscribe. It's just a click away.